This is episode 13. Welcome, fellow anglers, to the Good Karma Sport Fishing Podcast. I am Captain Ryan Van Fleet, your host here in the Florida Keys. Each week I bring you fishing tips, interviews, gear reviews, and more to help you maximize your fishing trip, catch big fish, and overall have fun. In this podcast, I'm going to talk about my not-so-secret grouper fishing technique. I call it grouper bombing. It's a very effective method. I've been using it for years. It took a while to perfect as far as the rods, the reels, the line, the hooks, and all that good stuff that goes along with this technique. But before I get into talking about the grouper bombing technique, I want to talk a little bit about some things. You know, when I got started in the fishing industry, I get asked this more and more now than I've ever been asked. I'm not sure why, but this just happened to me on Saturday with a client. He, asked me a lot of questions about how I got started and how long it took me to learn certain things and how long it would take him to learn it, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember hustling, trying to get work during the recession. But because I was older or considered older, and I did not look the part, as part of a Keys mate, I guess you can say. I didn't have the long curly hair and, however the mates are dressing nowadays. But anyways, I was passed over a lot. But when I did have the opportunity to work, even if it was for zero money, I jumped on a boat whenever I could. I had been networking with a captain out of Whale Harbor, which is a large marina down here in the Florida Keys, and located in Islamorada, where all the big there's a lot of big sport boats there. It's considered world famous. Everything's world famous down here, by the way, if you haven't already heard that before. But anyways, I'm not going to mention his name. He called me and told me to meet him at the local bar for a happy hour to talk about doing some mate work for him. So, well, the dude just never showed up or called me back, which is how it works down here for the most part. It frustrated me. The gigs I did get were good, and I made the absolute most of them. Listen, if you think it's easy down here, you're mistaken. I'm just saying. Fishing is very political in the Florida Keys. Let's just leave it at that. Everything looks all fine and dandy on Instagram with how people are posting. It's all lovey-dovey. No, it doesn't work like that, guys. So I won't get into that. I'm just going to leave it at that. But now, because I picked up on things quickly, the captains and mates I thought were mentors turned on me quickly. Some jobs, the other mates I was working with even stole my shit. They stole fishing tools, knives, WTF, right? True story. I worked under one captain that hated my ass. He would throw me on the hook on night trips with 8-foot seas, blinding rainstorms, then tell the other mates to leave me to it while they sat in the wheelhouse and drank coffee and laughed at me. So if you're like, it's just a little different down here. But anyways, he was trying to get me to quit, but I just kept working. Yeah, it did suck, but it was better than sitting in an office or getting called into HR because of my tone. So you're probably asking, how does what I'm talking about play into grouper fishing? Now, grouper fishing can be very frustrating, so much so that it can really make you feel like crap when the fish keeps kicking your butt over and over. And you lose about $100 or more in fishing tackle trying to catch one grouper. But that is grouper fishing. Kind of like working for crazy people or dealing with general problems that irritate you in life. But there is always a solution. Granted, it's not a 100% fix. Your inside voice can mess with you after you lose a fish over and over. If you've not had this happen, then you've not fished enough. When I started really targeting grouper on my yellowtail charters, when I first started chartering, my clients lost more grouper than you can ever imagine. I used the standard techniques I was taught by the captains down here that I worked under. Lines, rods, reels, everything you read about in all the magazines, that you see on all the TV shows. Um, but pretty much epic fails. My inner voice was yelling at me, you know, telling me that I got to try something different, and it kept getting louder and louder. Now, prior to starting my charter business, I had rode along with a commercial grouper and yellowtail fisherman a few times. This guy knew how to catch groupers and yellowtails and mangrove snappers on the toughest days. One day, it just clicked. I was sitting at the dock, looking at the boat. I was frustrated, and so what things that I do to like clear my head, I'll sit down in the morning, I'll have a cup of coffee, and I'll start writing things down on paper. But this morning I went outside and I went to the boat. I sat down. I just looked at the boat, and I kid you not, um, beautiful day. Um, and I said to myself, why hadn't I been targeting yellowtail grouper or targeting grouper like the commercial fishing guy was doing? Why wasn't I doing it? And just get away from the Keys Fishing Guide standard. Now, I mentioned it was a nice day, so I grabbed my 2 rods, some hooks, and some frozen speedos I had in the refrigerator, and I made up some chum ball mix and went grouper fishing. That day, I tore them up. The rest of the season, I scored epic catches of black grouper on nearly all charters with big mutton snappers and mangrove snappers mixed in. And I still have that GoPro footage to this day of me out there fishing alone. So on to the black groupers. Black groupers are one of the toughest fish to catch on the reefs here in the Florida Keys. Now, they're pretty easy to catch right after the season opens here in the Keys, May through June. But in the heat of the summer, the black groupers tend to get lockjaw. The photos that you guys are seeing on Instagram and on Facebook in the months of May and June with these guys holding up these massive black groupers, I'm going to let you in on a little inside story in case you don't know. These guys tend to fish the bottom all year round and are catching and releasing the same fish, probably even 6 months prior to the opener, and they're catching it 2 or 3 times on a particular spot. So basically, these guys know where these fish sleep. So black groupers can be residential. They're very territorial. They'll stay in one spot as long as the food's there. So on opening day, the guys go to the spot and they catch or spear the fish, and then they hold up the fish, make it look bigger than it actually is. Which I got a client, he calls it the Keys cheat, and you know who you are, brother. So I still tell people that about the Keys cheat photo. Anyways, now there's a couple popular spots I'll share with you that you can, if you get there, good luck with that. The first week of grouper season or into the first couple weeks are the Bibb and the Duane Rex off Key Largo. They have some monster groupers there. You can catch them really early in the morning. At night is a good time to target these fish when there's less dive boats. But you got to get there first and go even when it's crappy out. And you still got to go within the first couple of weeks of when grouper season opens, guys. Now, throughout the summer, it gets a little more challenging if you're a reef fisherman that sets the anchor and you're looking to catch black grouper consistently. I hear it all the time from the guys at the dock or the guys that call me on the phone and da da da. We're crushing the black groupers. Oh my God, we're crushing the black groupers. Then the next weekend, I see the same guy, and he's ranting and raving and frustrated that he's not catching them anymore. Where'd they go? What happened to them? They're all fished out. I just laugh. So then I don't see the guy around until November after the first cold front moves through and the fishing starts getting easy again. Then all of a sudden the guy shows back up at the dock and starts fishing. Now, a good fisherman enjoys the challenge and aims to catch year round, not just when it's easy. I see this with dolphin fishing too. When the dolphin are here, there's hundreds of people. When the dolphin are not around, they're not fishing. So, anyways, fishing's fun. Go fishing. Some days you're going to get your butt kicked, but if you're really looking on improving, um, you got to experience those days. It's not easy. So, as part of my mission on becoming a well-rounded fisherman, it took a couple years before I perfected the grouper bombing technique. Grouper bombing. It's just a name that I made up for. It sounded a lot better than chum balling for groupers. Now I chum ball or grouper bomb for black groupers in depths of 60 to 140 foot of water down here in the Upper Keys. How I normally introduce this on a charter is when the clients had enough yellowtail fishing or wreck fishing in general. I like to surprise them with my grouper fishing technique, as it's very addictive. I used to break it out earlier on into the charters when we were anchored up on yellowtail trips on half days, but the problem was once the client started chumballing for groupers, he had absolutely no interest in going back to flatlining for yellowtail. Once you feel the power of a black grouper on the other end of that line, you do not want to go back to yellowtail fishing. So now I let the clients get enough now I have to let the clients get enough yellowtail in the box. That assures that they have some fish in the box to eat at the end of the day, just in the event that they can't get the black groupers off the bottom for some reason. Sometimes the current messes with them, and some days the current has a lot to do with how the groupers are reacting on the baits and whether they can get in their holes quickly or not. That's I'll mention that in another podcast further down the road. Um, so before I get started with the client, as far as teaching them about the grouper fishing technique that we're going to use, I always say, "Are you ready to catch something big?" The looks on their faces are priceless when they hear me say this. Now, I go on to say I do have a strategy for getting those big groupers on the bottom without using weights. Then they look at me like I'm crazy, because all the client ever sees is what they do on YouTube or what they do on the TV shows. So, anyways, it's and then I tell them what we're going to be doing is we're going to be dropping grouper bombs, and then then they really look at me like I'm crazy, and it gets to be kind of comical at times. But fishing's fun. Now, the rest of the reef trip, the client gets fixated with dropping the grouper bombs. Has it extremely fun for them because they get to use lightweight rods and reels. They're not using heavy gear. It's not the typical setup that you see on the TV shows or on the YouTube channel, or that most standard charter boats use. So no bent butts allowed on my boat. So here are some tips on how to make the grouper bomb, or how I actually make it. Everybody's different, guys, on how they do things. So I just want you guys to realize that. So how I do things is going to be different from the next guy. I get people on my charter that say, "Well, I was on a charter down in Key West and he did this. Why aren't you doing that?" Guys, everybody is different. So I am very good at catching reef fish, and I'm very confident in what I do. So the first thing you got to do is you got to get a hold of some fresh Speedos. Frozen works too, but not 100% of the time. If you can't get the fresh Speedos, try to get some small blackfin tunas or skipjacks. Yeah, I know you want to put those blackfin tunas in the box and eat them, but guys, recycle those blackfin tunas into some big fish. I love using blackfin tuna chunks for mutton snapper fishing and for black grouper fishing on the reef. I actually prefer using blackfin tuna as chunks of bait over bonito. The but the Speedo is my absolute favorite bait to use on the reef, and I just love this bait. It's just amazing. Fish love Speedos in the Florida Keys, especially the black groupers. So when I get a hold of the Speedos, I like to cut a large Speedo into 3 chunks: the head, the middle, and the tail. Now I throw the tail into the soft chum, in other words, the chum ball mix that I'm going to be using. And I take all the guts and the blood off the cleaning board, and instead of putting those into the water, I mix that in with the chum ball mix. Now, Next thing you got to do is you got to butterfly a speedo head by removing the backbones, but leave the guts and especially the secret ingredient, the roe. Leave this roe dangling out. Roe tends to fire up a lazy fish. It's an old trick that works well. You're just now starting to see this on YouTube because the guys are really starting to let this content out there to drive traffic to the TV shows and all that good stuff. So, anyways, uh, for me, my absolute favorite part of the speedo to use is the head. Use the butterfly speedo head first. A lot of guys just use the chunk side, the middle part. Guys, use the head. Trust me. There's a lot of content out on the YouTube on how to make a butterflied a butterflied speedo head or a butterflied mackerel. Just use the same technique. So now you got to get the bait down without the weight. So here's the tricky part, the rig. So I'm going to kind of walk through this with you a little bit, and most of you guys that have dropped chum balls are going to get it, but a lot of you guys are going to find it kind of complicated. So if you do have some questions, please feel free to email me, and I'll do the best of walking you through the steps again. And eventually, I will make a video to put up on the on my website here, so you guys can refer back to the technique as far as a learning process. Oh, okay. So you have to have the right rod and reel for this type of fishing. You need a good spinning reel, flat out. You may think you have the best spinning reel in the world until it's time to go black grouper fishing in shallow water and chum ball. Now, ego tends to clog people's minds when it comes to fishing, especially when it comes to the reels. Oh my gosh. Oh, don't even get me started. Accurate versus pen, Shimano versus pen. Oh, I got an accurate. La 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 la. It's just crazy. It's very comical now. I use one reel and one reel only. I've been using it for years. It's the Shimano Twin Power 8000. So, anyways, before I get on with that, I talk a little bit about ego. Guys, I love professional wrestling, man. I'm an old school. I grew up watching the WWF, and I really do respect those old guys that I grew up watching. I'm seeing them more and more and more come about because they are very inspirational, and those guys have worked hard to that's wrestling was a hard career to. It's kind of like fishing. You're either going to sink or you're going to swim. So I like to couple of the guys I grew up watching are old school, or good old Ric Flair and Diamond Dallas Page, the DDP. So DDP, one of his quotes, man, is "Ego kills talent." Now this holds true in the fishing world. If you get what I'm saying, you're going to catch fish with what I'm about to teach you. If you don't, you may or may not. But hey, man, it's all good. Okay, so I talked a little bit about my spinning reel. I use the Shimano Twin Power 8000. It costs about 600 some odd bucks, and you can buy it on Amazon.com or on Bass Pro. As far as setting the drags, I like to set I like to set the drags tight. I mean tight. I use my hands to set the drag when I grouper fish, not a scale. I fill the reel spool with 40-pound braided line. Um, as far as brand goes, I use Power Pro. The rods, use the absolute best short 5-foot jigging rod you can afford. And the rods need to have the absolute best guides that can handle the pressure of the braid to where it won't crack the guides over time. I use custom built adrenaline jigging rods. The rods are short, extremely light, fast tapered, and have a parabolic flex to absorb the shock of the fish, and a lot of backbone with the absolute best guides, eyes, and reel seats. Now, you've heard this term parabolic before in previous podcasts, and everybody talks about it. What parabolic means is it bends from the rod tip to the gimbal, allowing the entire rod to fight the fish. Now, Brandon Meltzer, the owner of Adrenaline Rods, added what I like to call extra sauce to the group of rods that I ordered to make them perfect. And believe me, these rods are absolutely perfect for chumballing my chum ball technique, grouper bombing. Now, my advice on the rods: take it or leave it. Do not buy retail. Do not buy retail rods for serious grouper bombing. The rods should be custom built with the absolute best components and built with that extra detail when it comes to putting the components together, which means the glue. You can get a good blank, but if your rod guy does not take the extra time to add that extra special sauce, I call it, to your rod, true, you're going to get a good blank. It's going to be what you want blank wise, but that blank is just a small piece of the puzzle. Order the extra sauce. It's worth it. It has to be put together. The rod has to be put together to handle the abuse of the extreme conditions, both physical and environmental. I have tore up high-end black hole manufacturer rods I purchased from Tackle Direct within a week after purchase. I actually tore them up within the first week of grouper season a few years ago. Now, Tackle Direct did replace both rods. I love Tackle Direct, but I would never use another retail rod to target black groupers with. Never again. Now, you're going to say, oh, have you tried Shimano, Daiwa jigging rods? Oh, it worked for me once. Guys, I also tore up Penn and Shimano jigging rods that I bought off the shelf at the big box retailers. Now, these rods will work at first, but they're going to eventually fail on you guys, and they're going to fail at the most inopportune times, trust me. I'm just trying to help you guys save money, and doing it right the first time is the key to saving money. Learn from my mistakes. Groupers and big amberjacks will test your gear to the fullest, and believe me, they're going to test your gear. So on with the secret. So typically I fish for yellowtails for about 1 to 2 hours before I start targeting groupers. Why do I do this? I try to create a very natural environment. I want to get all the ballyhoo behind the boat. I want to get the speedos behind the boat. I want to get as much bait behind the boat as I can, just to create a natural environment. Basically, you've just created your boat has just become like this haven for fish. So with that being said, by bringing in those smaller fish and getting them comfortable around your boat, the larger fish are going to start coming closer to your boat, and they're going to start eating a little bit. They're going to get a little bit more comfortable. Some of the biggest mistakes I've seen guys make is that, oh my God, we got to throw a net on on the ballyhoo. We got to start throwing nets. No, I do not throw a net on the ballyhoo, especially in my black grouper areas. I want to make these areas as natural as I can. When you start netting ballyhoo, you may not know it, but it's going to screw up your black grouper fishing. It's just not natural to throw a net on fish, and then it just disrupts the environment when you're trying to catch big fish. So, just saying, leave the hoop nets in the boat. Leave your cast nets in the boat. Resist that urge. Catch some of these fish. Catch some bait fish one at a time using hair hooks. But if you're really serious about catching black grouper, don't throw a net or don't put a hoop net in the water. Just catch the bait fish one at a time. Get a natural environment going around your boat. You're creating a haven. Basically, you're using all that bait fish behind your boat as live chum to bring in the black grouper. So, and also too, you just continue catching some yellowtail. Do it one at a time. Don't use two rods. Methodically fish, and you're going to catch bigger fish doing it this way. If you want to get some yellowtail tips, as I haven't done a yellowtail podcast yet, Florida Sportsman Magazine did a good yellowtail article with my tips this past June, in the June 2018 issue. So check it out. You can find it on my website. If you have ever fished for yellowtail seriously, you've seen these fish quit at times, quit eating maybe 1 or 2 hours into the charter, and then you're like, what happened? But the fish are still there. Most guys will pull the hook and say, oh well, they're full, then they're going to leave. But The commercial guys and those that really know how to reef fish look at this as an opportunity to get the black groupers. These fish just showed up in your chum because you created a natural environment behind your boat. You let the bait fish stay there. You didn't spook them. You got everything nice and comfortable. So the black groupers love to eat yellowtail snappers, guys, and typically yellowtails quit eating when the big black groupers show up. And mutton snappers, man, they're gonna crash those ballyhoo that are in your chum slick. And if you have speedos behind the boat, then you have black groupers below your boat, guys. They are there. Next, let's talk about the line that I use. Now, I load up the Twin Power 8000 with 40-pound braid, and then and then to the braid line I attach 4 feet of 40-pound fluorocarbon leader. Yeah, I use 40-pound leader. Oh, why don't you use 80? Why don't you use 100, brother? I get a lot of bites on 40-pound fluorocarbon leader, and it stands up to abuse. I have caught groupers with 100-pound line dangling out of their mouth. I've caught groupers with 80-pound line dangling out of their mouth using 40-pound. So, how I attach I use a Bristol knot, an improved Bristol knot, to attach the 40-pound fluorocarbon to the braided main line. And these are the knots that I use. I'll put them up in the show notes. The spider hitch, the improved Bristol knot, and the improved clinch knot. Now let's talk about hooks. I use black colored hooks because that's what the commercial fisherman taught me. Trust me on the black color hooks. They work when it comes to grouper fishing consistently. Now silver hooks work, but not consistently, I found. Big circle hooks, I use big circle hooks. I prefer the offset circle hooks, size 8 Gamakatsu offset point circle. Been using them for years, and they work just fine. I also use the Big Gun Mustad hooks. I found these to be great hooks, the size 7s and 8s for black grouper chum balling. Now these hooks are super sharp, and they're strong hooks, and they're black in color. I recently found out about these I think it was, I've been using them, I would say recently, but I've been using them now for about a year and a half. I love these Big Gun Mustad hooks. So, but you got to buy them online because for some reason they're not in the stores, but I don't know, whatever. So next you got to drop the grouper bomb. Now, instead of making it rain, you got to make it snow. In other words, you got to drop the chum balls. You got to drop a grouper chum ball. The grouper bomb. Again, you can refer to the Florida Sportsman article for my chum ball recipe, or use whatever works for you. So, first you got to get the fish used to the snowball effect, I call it, the chum ball snowball effect. Do this by packing a few chum balls tight and dropping them down without any bait. You got to make it rain. Make it rain, baby. Get the fish curious and off the bottom, away from their coral caves. You want the groupers to come off the bottom so they come higher up in the water column so they're easier to catch. Start teasing them up by dropping those snowballs. Now, to get started, you got to use a butterflied speedo head. You got to pull off enough leader, enough to where it can move freely from the chum bucket to over the rail. So you pack the bait tight around the speedo, molding the bait into the ball around the chum. Just know the chum ball will get deep before it falls apart. The chum ball creates a smoke screen around the bait. Fish see the big eyes of the speedo and smell it. It drives them crazy. I know so because the groupers told me that. Oh, I love using speedos as bait. The speedos, like having a speedo, like fresh speedos in the box. I know I'm gonna get some really big bites from some big groupers or mutton snappers. When I have live speedos, I know that live speedos are the absolute best bait for wahoo fishing in the Florida Keys. That is no doubt. These baits are fast, and these wahoo hunt these baits. They are just a awesome bait. Now, back to the chum balls. Enough with wahoo fishing, because when I get started talking about that and using live bait, it's you'll get me off on another tangent here. So, anyways, the chum ball should be the size of a softball, a rather large chum ball. That's just how I do it. So next, you got to drop the chum ball over the rail and then feed it off with your fingers, similar to what your how you yellowtail fish. So you have to feed the chum ball really quickly, pulling it off so the chum ball doesn't break too early off into the water column. Otherwise, you're not going to get the bait deep. So it does take a little bit of practice, because you want to make sure that the line flows freely through the guides. Now, and then you have to feed the chum ball really quickly, and then you just got to keep feeding it until you get the bite. Now the bait will get to the bottom, and then the chum ball is going to be dissolved, and then the current's going to lift it up probably about 2 to 5 feet, sometimes 10 feet off the bottom, and then it's going to drift along the rock or along the coral right above these groupers' homes. It's kind of like somebody going door to door selling something. They're just that bait's just going to keep going from house to house to house until that one person buys what that person is selling. So think of that Speedo as just cruising across the ledges or these groupers' houses until one of those groupers is, just can't take it anymore, and he comes out and he just eats it. So that's just how I think about it, or how it, just to put it in, similar to, that's just how it works. So the bite can be rather subtle sometimes. It's super important, and it does take some practice. That you have to you have to feed it out with your fingers sometimes to feel that grouper bite it, or the grouper is just going to tear it out of your hands. Now, when you feel that when the grouper's not really biting, when the groupers are just going to suck it in, they're just going to sit on it. And if you feel a subtlety on there, you have to reel as hard as fast as you can to get that slack back. Even if you think that it might have been a bite, you have to trust your gut and get it back. Otherwise, that grouper's just going to grab that bait and get into his hole. He's going to sit with it, and then you'll feel it get tight. And by then, it's too late for you. You're going to you probably had about a 20% chance of getting the grouper out of his hole. So anyway, something that you may not, or you may already know this, but groupers always eat towards their home, meaning they always eat from top to bottom. This is why most people miss fish when they put their weights on the bottom. You want the bait higher up in the column so you have a better chance of turning the grouper's head. A weight can just hurt you guys. I've seen guys go through whole 20 some weights because that grouper just still continues to kick their butts. I have learned you just catch that I catch less fish at the bottom when I use weights with long leaders, but that's just me. So hence I don't use them. No matter what somebody says, I don't use them. It's my boat, my rules when it comes to this type of fishing. But if a guy brings along his own weights, his own leaders, and wants to do it, then go ahead, rig up, do what you feel comfortable with, and then I'll drop the chum ball right aside him. 9 out of 10 times, the chum ball is gonna get the fish, and the guy is gonna quit using that long leader and weight, and he's gonna say, "Let me try that." So 9 out of 10 times, guys, it happens. Now, once you feel the bite, you got to flip the bail on the spinning rod, and like I said before, you got to reel as hard as fast as you can to get tight, and then hold on. Try to turn the fish's head and bend with the fish. I keep the drag locked up until he's off the bottom. That's where that parabolic rod's going to come into play. And as soon as you feel that you have him off the bottom, then back off that drag really quick, because you've got him off the bottom. He's not going to get back down there. And that's going to, by backing off in the drag, it's going to help you prevent pulling hooks and breaking off. So pretty simple, right? Just remember, 9 out of 10 times when you do this, you won't feel that grouper bite. You just have to keep letting that line out until your gut tells you that you got him on. Sometimes sometimes these fish are way back in the chum slick, and other times they will they'll be right underneath your chum bag eating. Now, I won't get into the fish fighting techniques. I kind of touched briefly on it, but I've just learned, man, that everybody fights fish differently. If you want to learn how to fight a fish, you have to practice on the fish, and kind of train yourself. In order to be better, you have to practice, 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 practice. So, well, that's it for today. I hope that you guys found some value in today's podcast, and you're able to add this technique to your arsenal. So in the event that the standard hook and line long leader method is not working for the species that you're targeting on the bottom, that you can make a shift and try grouper bombing or chum balling. It works. So I'm just going to leave it at that for today. Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, or suggestions, I would like to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook at Good Karma Fishing Charters, Instagram at Good Karma Sport Fishing _FL_keys, or you can email me at goodkarmaryan@gmail.com. Please also share this podcast with a fellow angler and check out my website, goodkarmasportfishing.com, and sign up for the monthly newsletter. I aim to provide you with fishing tips and information so you can make the best out of your time fishing. Most important, just remember, anytime you're fishing, it's all good.